Hello and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest today is Adam Nagourney. Oh my God, it's Adam Nagourney. He's the New York Times national political reporter, but also the author of The Times: How the Newspaper of Record Survived Scandal, Scorn, and the Transformation of Journalism. Our host, of course, is Sri Srinivasan. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the one that was yelling, "Oh my God," in the background. We are so thrilled to have Adam join us, and we are on today at a special time, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. So we're hoping that you are able to join us. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. And we hope that you like, comment, share, retweet, do all the things that you do to make sure people have a chance to watch the show. Of course, if you uh, share it with folks, you can tag them in the comment, and it'll give them a notification, because we really want to make sure folks have a chance to join us for this very special show. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and we will have a chance to put it on screen. Uh, a big shout out to everyone watching on replay. Most often, folks watching replay get the very beginning of the show. So thank you very much for taking the time to go back and watch this. We're looking forward to an incredible conversation with Adam. In addition to his book, there's also a special New York Times cooking section in today's paper, focusing on colorful cookies for the holidays. So you won't want to miss that as well. Let's say hello to a few folks. And the first one I'm going to bring up is Naomi Service, who made it joining us from the dreary Upper West Side. Naomi, I'm glad that you were able to join us at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I wasn't sure if you would have heard about the time change. I mentioned it a few times, but I was hoping that you got the message. That's a little bit of a joke, because Naomi told me she appreciated my emails where I repeated it several times. So let's go ahead and bring on Sri really quickly. Um, and so before we do that, we'll bring in my mom to say hi. She's watching from Florida. She went down for the winter. Um, she'll be back in March. Mom, thank you for joining us. And there we go. There's Sri. Sri, good to see you.
Good morning. Good morning. Hello, everyone, wherever you're watching in the world. We're delighted to have you with us. This is the Sunday New York Times Read Along, and we usually do it, as you heard from Neil, a little earlier in the day, but we're glad to be here. We're doing this because our guest is on California time, and you're going to meet Adam Nagourney, who is author of The Times. And there you go, Neil has a book too. And I've been racing to finish this before our show. I didn't quite end it, but I know how it turns out and look forward to talking about it with Adam. For those of you who missed our show last week, we got an award. We are now an award-winning podcast or webcast. This is there. Neil has it as well. It says the 2023 W3 Awards, and this is a prize for best podcast. We got the silver, and we are so proud of everyone who's associated with this, starting with Neil and our producers, Paula and Carla Baranakis, Paula Kiger, who helped for so many years, and to every guest who's been on the show for 8 years now. We're very, very thankful to them, and of course, thankful to Adam. We're also grateful to our sponsor, Muckrack. Thank you so much to the folks at Muckrack for pulling their support, for giving us so much support on the show. And if you'd like to be a sponsor, let us know. You can just email me, Sri@Digimentors, or Neil@Digimentors.group is our email address. And the show is brought to you also by our company, Digimentors, which does digital marketing, events, and programs like this. If you'd like a podcast, let us know. We do strategic comms, PR, training. I'm doing my AI workshops around the world, and we help people recruit folks in the digital space. So please let us know where you're watching from. There's my workshop. I used to have hair once. Adam only knows me now without hair, but I used to have hair at one point, and that's my generative AI class, my non-scary guide to AI. I want to just quickly show everyone what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about the New York Times, and we have this is the front section, of course. This is the book review, which we'll be looking at, and Neil's super excited about the cooking special section. It's normally a tabloid section when it comes out. This time it's a broadsheet all about cookies, right, Neil?
Yeah.
And
not just a broadsheet. It's a big Pano 8. When you open it, it's going to fold out to like 4 pages inside.
Yeah. And this is the Arts and Leisure cover, Metropolitan, Real Estate, Sunday Opinion, Who You Are is a Choice is the headline there. And I believe this gentleman was on Saturday Night Live yesterday.
He was. And so the interesting thing, Sri, is that Pam and I were watching last night because we knew we had the later start time today. And we got to the musical guest, and she and I both looked at each other. Who is this guy? We didn't know who he was.
Noah Kagan, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Khan, I think, or something.
Khan, I don't know. And this is the Sunday business cover. And folks, while you're watching, tag a friend, anyone who's interested in the news, interested in fighting misinformation, disinformation, anyone who loves print, tell them that we're doing the show. They can watch us right now live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, or they can watch us on repeat. It'll air right away on all these channels, also on digimentors.group, the website. You will see right on the top a link to the read along and our archives going back many years. Here is the Sunday magazine cover. Neil was excited about this.
About producing football shows, not so much for the football aspect, but the TV production. I think it's fascinating. And then this T Magazine story, Sri, that's incredible in terms of, I remember seeing it online, all about, how the theater has been, Jewish playwrights and performers, etc., actors. But I didn't realize it was a T Magazine story. So that's really interesting to see how they presented it.
We really need to talk to the T Magazine folks to do a read along just with them, just as we did with the magazine. Some of you may have joined us when Neil and I got to go to Jake Silverstein's office. He's the editor-in-chief at the New York Times headquarters for a Wednesday night read along. And here I recognize Jesse Eisenberg and Matthew Broderick, but I don't know the names necessarily of these other folks. And here, the reason we're here today at a later time, because the author of this book, Adam Nagourney, is in California. How the Newspaper of Record Survived Scandal, Scorn, and the Transformation of Journalism. We bring Adam on and get started.
Absolutely, and make sure we get some of these great comments that have come in.
I'll pull them on right now. They're just great to see. Everyone, Melissa Ludke is watching from Cambridge. Miriam watching from Hell's Kitchen. By the way, I should tell everyone it's a rainy day here in New York. The Empire State Building is out that window, but you can't see it. It's easy to be a skyscraper today, Neil, because the sky has come down through the fog. Diana is watching from central Nebraska, and Marilyn's watching from Staten Island. Thanks, everybody. Let's bring on Adam.
Absolutely.
Hey, Adam. Good morning. Thanks for having me, especially this late in the day for you guys. So I appreciate it.
We are delighted to have you, Adam. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
When we first came to you, you made it clear 5:30 a.m. was not going to happen.
It's a little tough. Yeah. I mean, for you, I would have done it, but I appreciate you doing this. So
thank you. I want to give a shout out to our good friend, Kevin McKenna, who is deputy business editor of the Times, good friend of yours, who mentioned this to you.
Yeah, and he's been we can talk about this later. He's been a great help on the book from day one, and me had all kinds of records and memories that he shared with me. And he told me about you, so he's been fantastic.
Yeah, great. Apollo's watching from drizzly Philadelphia. Mary C. Curtis is watching. She says, buckle up, promises to be a great show. Former NYT person and roll call columnist, podcast host from Charlotte, North Carolina. As a former guest, do I get a piece of this award? Yes, you do. Everybody who's ever participated I'll shave off a little bit of the silver.
Just a little bit, yeah.
It's real silver. And Mary, thank you so much for watching. Ken Fisher's watching from Iowa, the Eastern Iowa contingent. We need to up the number of people watching in Eastern Iowa, Adam. So I'm hoping you'll pull them in.
We'll talk politics.
Yeah, exactly. And Carol King says hello. And Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar, longtime friend of the show, a multiple-time guest on the show, is here as well, host of She's on Call. And Carol says, journalist and good friend watching from Tampa Bay, Florida. So this is early morning here in New York, not as early, 11:30. We are talking to Adam Nagourney. Adam, let's get right to it.
Sure.
Tell us why a Timesman wrote a book about the Times while still at the Times.
Yeah, I mean, this is a book I thought about for a long time. And backing up a little bit, I always wanted to work at the New York Times. If you had met me as a fresh person in college back in whatever year that was, I was talking to friends about wanting to work at the New York Times. And I read Gay Talese's book about the New York Times back in 1969, and it just really kind of influenced me. And it's something I thought about for a long, long time. I was wondering whether I could still do it while still working at the Times, and finally decided in about 2015, 2016 to do it, and put together a book proposal and shopped it around. And there was a bunch of interest and started working in 2016.
And how did you decide that, were there questions about you working at the Times and trying to tell the full story? What would the constraints be?
Yeah, I mean, this is an unauthorized book. Obviously, pretty much everyone cooperated with me. But to deal with that problem that you raised, which is something I thought about a lot, this book ends in 2016. There's an epilogue dealing with the period afterwards, but it ends in 2016. So it's a history. And I'm writing about people who are gone. They've either retired or, died. So I'm writing about people in the past with maybe two exceptions. So I avoid what I think would be the incredibly uncomfortable and probably untenable situation about writing about the paper now while I work there. Again, I do talk about it a little bit in the epilogue, but nothing like the past. The other part about sort of focusing on pre-2016 is, people are more on that. I did hundreds of interviews and lots of documents, and people were obviously much more honest in talking about their experiences than they might have been if I was talking to them while they were working there now. I mean, and then I had access to all kinds of documents and files and archives pre-2016, going back to 1977 or so, even earlier, that I honestly just don't think I'd be able to get if I was writing about the current period.
I certainly understand that. In terms of your work as national political reporter, you're so busy all the time. How did you carve out time to even put this book together?
So when I signed the contract in 2016, I was the Los Angeles bureau chief. I'd been the chief national political reporter through 2010, left after the election of Barack Obama, thinking there couldn't be anything else interesting to happen in national politics, right? And became Los Angeles bureau chief. I took a leave from the paper to work on writing the book, came back, covered West Coast culture. Came back, helped on the 2020 campaign, then covered West Coast culture, and now I'm back full time helping out on the 2024 presidential campaign. But I don't see any way anyone could write a book, at least I couldn't write a book of this ambition without taking a leave. I think I took about 18 months of unpaid leave to work on actually writing this book. It would have been, I just don't have enough bandwidth to have done both.
Well, I certainly hope the advance made it possible for you to take that leave. So I appreciate that that you were spending time with us talking about the book. Tell us what it's like to be the national political reporter out in California and the role that California plays in national politics. It may not be obvious. We have a lot of international viewers who may think that national coverage is out of Washington and parts of the country.
I mean, there's been, I'm based here, but I'm covering national politics, so I'm writing about biography stuff and analysis stuff and all kinds of random stories. So where I am is not really relevant directly to what I'm writing about, with the obvious exception is that since Gavin Newsom, the governor here, has been in the news, as you might have noticed this week, debating Ron DeSantis, who's running for president. I've written about that, but generally it's much broader. When I first started as national political reporter, I guess I got appointed in 2002, and the executive editor at the time, Howell Raines, who was written about in this book, called me into his office and said, I want you to do this job, which is, again, the job I've wanted my whole life. He said, I only have one requirement or question: will you move to Washington, D.C.? And I said, I absolutely will for this job, right? I was a New Yorker. My point is, I think what's changed is we have people all over the country who are covering national politics, and part of that is because of, I think, post-COVID and people not feeling confined to work in the office. But we've always had this sort of desire to try to get people in the country to get a broader, non-Washington focused perspective. So that is a result of what's going on. So, I think this is off the top of my head, I think there are 4 or 5 people here who are covering politics, and they're covering national politics. It just means longer plane rides. It's a little bit more difficult than if you live in Washington to get to Iowa than from here. But again, it's just, this is where I happen to be now to cover this national beat.
I hear you. I'm just looking at the back of the book now. You mentioned Gay Talese, and the book, of course, that he wrote, The Kingdom and the Power, is something that a lot of read even decades later as to understand American journalism. And it says here, he gave you a blurb. It says, with impeccable reporting, Adam gives us intimate portraits of the men and women of the New York Times who reported on and wrote the headlines of world happenings. In the style of a first-rate dramatist, he captures what happens behind the scenes in the newsroom, and he goes on. It's all praise. What was it like to connect with Gay Talese?
Oh my God! Obviously that blurb was incredible. It was remarkable. It was just remarkable. After I got the contract, I think the first thing I did is I went to his place on the Upper East Side. I think it's the Upper East Side, and knocked on the door. And he opened the door and he said, "I have been waiting for 15 years for someone to write this book." And he invited me into his apartment, into his home, and sat down with me and told me how he would do it, how he would frame it, gave me suggestions for people to talk to, gave me phone numbers, put me in contact, and then he took me out to dinner. He could not have been more classy in supporting and helping me in writing this book right until the end when I sent him the galley, and he gave that incredibly generous blurb. And as you can imagine, that was incredibly moving to me, just because his book is what influenced me to write this book. I don't want to remotely position my book as a sort of a successor to his book, because I don't write as well as he does. I don't think anyone does. And if you go back and read his book again, it's been 40, 50 years since it was published, 69. It is still a terrific book. It's wonderfully written with wonderful characters. It's just great. So, but he's just been great all along. I just been honored to have gotten to know him, to have had his support and help on this.
For those of you who don't know Gay Talese's name or his work, please look it up. If you can get this book, you can. I mean, his book about the Times do, but he's written about so many topics, and his magazine pieces, just incredible work. And I should have read it all the way through, Adam, where he says, in his long, wonderful book, I did not find one page that failed to interest me. That's really nice. And look who's joined us. Kevin McKenna says,
hey,
hello. Everyone should read this book. That's a good, strong endorsement from Kevin, who is deputy business editor at the Times, and will be joining us as a guest again in the spring, having been with us before. Tell us about the mechanics of this. You took a leave, and then you went to see Gay Talese, and then what was the process of trying to tell the story, and then you deliberately ended it in 2016, as you mentioned already. But just walk us through the process. How did you, for today, when I talk to young people or others who know that the New York Times is successful in this digital era, it wasn't obvious that that was going to be the case for any newspaper was going to survive the digital era. And although in 2008, there were some very low points in the Times. Kevin, of course, was there at the beginning of the Times journey on the web, and we can talk about that too. But if you can just explain to people that it wasn't really obvious that the Times would survive.
Yeah, that's a great point. When I first started working on this book in 2016, I had no idea how it was going to end. I did not know if the New York Times would even exist, at least exist in the form that we know it. And it became clear to me as I was researching it and watching what was going on that this book would have a conclusion, a narrative arc, and at least from a business, but I would argue journalistic perspective, a happy ending, which during various parts of the book does not seem that likely. When I got this contract, or when I first started thinking about the idea, the first thing I did was I went and saw Arthur Sulzberger Jr., who was the who was the publisher at the time. And I told him what I wanted to do, and I asked him if he would cooperate. In other words, he would sit down for interviews. And he said, "Let me think about it." He got back to me a couple of weeks later, and he said, "Okay, I have decided I'm going to cooperate with you on this book. I will give you all the time that you need." He said, "But I am not going to tell anyone else what to do. They're on their own. You shouldn't expect anyone else to cooperate with you. I'm just doing this for myself." And I'm like, "That's fine." And he said, "It's an unauthorized book. They're not going to read it in advance. They have no kind of approval right." The one thing I didn't think of, which I should have thought of, was once the publisher said he's going to talk to me, pretty much everyone did. I mean, even more. I think everyone who was involved in this book, with perhaps one exception, agreed to interviews. And I think that Arthur opened up the door to that. So I started off doing that. I made a priority of trying to talk to older players, I think for obvious reasons, in case they passed away or had health impairments as the research went on. Obviously did not anticipate COVID was going to lock down all interviews or archival work, but most of it was actually done by the time the pandemic began. The other thing I did is I started going to the New York Public Library and other libraries to go through archives. Archives are a critical part of this paper, of this book, because I really rely on these contemporaneous documents, as well as videos, transcripts of interviews, videos of moments in the newsroom to sort of retell this story. They're crucial. The other thing that was crucial is the Times, for a long time, required its editors and business people to turn over all their papers to the New York Times official archives. They stopped doing that in, I think, 1992. So for all the key players after that, I asked if they had kept their papers and if they would share them with me. And lots of people did, from executive editors like Joe Lelyveld and Max Frankel and Jill Abramson to Kevin McKenna. And I think that is critical to telling this story. The New York Times is obviously a very organized place, or sure seems that way on the outside. It's not quite as organized as I expected. And as I was poking around, I realized, that years ago they had all these executive editors do oral histories, and there are transcripts of them all over the place. That was kept by the official New York Times historian, Susan Dreyfus, who's also a member of the Sulzberger family. And she invited me to her apartment and gave me access to all these kinds of documents that I think had been forgotten. Things like, for example, a transcript of a meeting when Joe Lelyveld, the executive editor, went to the board of the New York Times to talk about the paper's coverage of Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton. And it was just fascinating. Again, because it would have been hard to recreate that, but to have the actual dialogue with Lelyveld talking about how the paper was deliberately slow and perhaps too slow in dealing with what at the time was an awfully difficult story for a paper like the New York Times. So that was really, really helpful. And it turned out that Susan Dreyfus was in the newsroom with a video camera, whatever they were called, and I think they were called videos, on the day the Challenger exploded, which was a really, really, really big moment, obviously, in the Times history and also in writing in this book. And also on the day when the Star report, looking into the Lewinsky story I alluded to before, got released. So she was in the room when Joe Lelyveld and his managing editor, Bill Keller, were talking about exactly how did they handle this very, dare I say, sordid account that was contained in the Star report of the interactions between Monica Lewinsky and the President of the United States.
So many stories to talk about, Adam. Here is a comment from one of your colleagues. Mujib Mashal is watching in India, South Asia Bureau Chief for the New York Times, and looking forward to reading, he said. And folks, tag a friend right now. They can join us now or later on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. We do this every Sunday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, talking about the New York Times. But also we've done, Adam, other papers, including the Washington Post, the Globe and Mail, the Khaleej Times out of Dubai, the Chicago Sun-Times. So we celebrate newspapers here. And let me ask you about that. You had said that you weren't sure the Times would exist in print necessarily, or in the format it is in so long. And this is what the Sunday paper looked like. Maybe it was a little bigger in the 80s, but it's still pretty big. So what does that mean? What is the role of print in a journalistic world that's changed so dramatically?
So I think that print is still an important part of the New York Times. I don't want to use the word product, but just forgive me to say product for a second. A lot of people get the paper in print. The newspaper makes a lot of revenue from print, from subscribers. I think it's, last I checked, $800 a year to get the print paper. So it's still pretty crucial. Now, that is, I think, obviously a older audience, I think it's fair to say, and without having any access to the latest sort of studies that the paper has done on this subject, I would surmise that in an X number of years, 10, 15, the paper will move entirely from a print product to a digital product. I could say from being in the newsroom that the focus is every morning, every day, all day on digital. There's still a lot of energy put into the print paper, but people have to think about every day about digital, getting paper, getting stories, getting stuff on the line, getting stuff online as soon as possible, new innovative ways of covering breaking stories, presidential debates, new ways of presenting them. You'll see tons of examples of this in terms of the sort of the visual way that stuff is told on your phone or on your computer. And it's been a big transformation. So I do think that's where the paper is going eventually. One of the interesting things here is, and we can talk more about this later, there are a lot of reasons why I think the paper's transformation to digital was ultimately successful. It obviously was not smooth, and other places were faster, I think. But two reasons. One is that there were people in the newsroom, and Kevin McKenna was one of them, who kind of saw the future, who was open-minded and realized that the world is moving to a digital world. Even more important, I would argue, or I argue in the book, is that the publisher at the time, Arthur Sulzberger Jr., was always open to this. And if you look at his career, before he joined the Times, he was a reporter at, I think, the Associated Press. He was a wire reporter, which means that he didn't have the kind of clock or the loyalty to the morning story that people who grew up with the New York Times did. The sort of metabolism that you work all day, you write a story, it's edited, and then you wake up the next morning and it's on your doorstep. He had that mindset of like, you write a story and it's posted. And he always saw it that way. And the other thing is, and I talk about this in the book, and I don't mean this flippantly at all, he was a Star Trek fan. So he was really into science fiction. And he would say years and years ago, I don't care if we have to beam this information into our readers' heads, we'll get it to them. So I don't think he ever had any hesitation at all about paper moving in this direction, or had any doubt about it. That's where it was moving. And, to be clear, it was far from the smoothest process ever. But at the same time, I think that kind of mindset at the top, plus lots of other people, I don't want to minimize other people, allowed the paper to make the transformation that it has and why it is where it is today.
I'm pulling up on the screen here the very first New York Times. I know you joined in '96, so was it before or after November or whenever the launch was?
Wow, that was like, I didn't even realize that you said it. Yeah, that would have been, I think that would have been right around the time I joined, actually, yeah.
And what was your own journey, Adam, in terms of being open to tech, open to digital, open to the web? Thanks to Kevin McKenna, I got to work as a professor doing an internship of sorts at the Times on the web, working on a project. And the attitude was not everybody being open, everybody being excited about the web at that time, as we know. And that's, of course, changed as you've described. But what was your own journey?
Yeah, let me talk about both. Now, again, looking at the data of this, I started the paper at the beginning of 1996, covering the Bob Dole campaign. He ran for president as a Republican in 1996. And the reason I'm saying that is I remember being in a motel room in Russell, Kansas, where he grew up, late at night, and reading the Times on my computer with incredibly slow download speeds. But still, at 11 o'clock at night, I guess it was 11 o'clock at night, I was able to read stories as they were posted. And I assume, trust my memory here, that I was working off of this homepage. I assume. But I remember thinking at the time, I swear this is true, like, this is where the world is going. I'm no forward-looking person. I'm a dinosaur as much as everyone else, but like it seemed pretty clear that if I could read the New York Times at 11 o'clock at night on a slow modem computer in Russell, Kansas, at some point that's where the world was going. So that said, I don't want to come across as some avatars. I mean, there was lots of resistance to the cultural changes that this meant in the paper. Okay, so you have people early on, some of the biggest executive editors in the book, Abe Rosenthal, Max Frankel, who were highly skeptical that the world was going to move into an entirely digital sort of product again. And also some of the changes that meant. You find memos from Max Frankel where he's saying, "I don't see why we're giving our news away." This is when they were sending out a fax. You can, if people don't know what that is, just Google it. Of their stories for the next day. He says, "Why are we giving this away? Why are people going to buy it?" You have Abe Rosenthal saying, who was a really legendary, if very flawed executive editor, excuse me, saying, "I can see one day, excuse me, that people are going to read the Times on a black box, but they're never going to stop reading the actual newspaper." So there was a lot of resistance. And over the years, there was a lot of people just not believing this is where the world was going to go. And more than that, and more subtly, not being willing to make some of the changes that necessitated this new world. I'll give you one example, right? So you have a really big story, a scoop, right? In the old days, you hold it back and then you put it in the paper the next day and hopefully freak out your competitors, right? You can't do that anymore. And, I talk about one place where I think this became really clear. A team of New York Times reporters came up with compromising information on Eliot Spitzer, who was the governor of New York at the time, and that would lead to his resignation, having to do with, as I recall, his assignation with the prostitute. I think that was it. And they posted it in the afternoon because they realized that Spitzer was going to break the story himself to take this thing out of it. That's a typical kind of political way to deal with a bad story. And so they just posted it. And there's a scene in the newsroom where, they post the story and they look up on television screens around the newsroom, and all of a sudden it's saying, "The New York Times reports that Eliot Spitzer, blah, blah, blah." And I think that was the moment when, they realized how the world was changing. Now, there's still people, not so much now, but for a while, there were people that would say, "Why are we going to post our story before it's published? Because that gives our competitors a chance to jump on it and steal our scoop." But, that's the way the world's changing. And that is one of many cultural changes that have taken place. And I would argue that that's done. Like all those changes, like you do not see that resistance at all. I think that editors like Dean Baquet, I think Joe Kahn now, are very clear that this is where the paper is going. Dean Baquet used to say, "This is where we're going. We want you to be part of this. If you're not comfortable with this, we understand this, but you need to be part of this new world that we're part of."
I wanted to jump in, if I may. Two things, Kevin. One, here's the article for when the Times introduced its website in January 1996. It was on D7 of the business section. It's just interesting to see the way they framed it. The New York Times begins publishing daily on the World Wide Web today, offering readers around the world immediate access to most of the daily newspaper's contents. A service hopes to build readership in cyberspace.
It's a term we don't use anymore. No one says
that. Right. Cyberspace. Wow.
And I think they were already on AOL, if I'm not mistaken, Adam. That for some time they were on that.
They started on it. Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, that's what I was going to say. Actually, is that I joined. So I remember being a sophomore in college. This would have been 1992. I joined AOL because they offered access to the New York Times online. It couldn't, and I had the print edition as well. I delivered newspapers on campus. I also did it in high school for the teachers. But I used to deliver newspapers to various departments on campus. But the idea of getting the New York Times on AOL on my computer with a dial-up modem, it was a Macintosh LC. I mean, just incredible concept, just that transformation, and obviously it's come so far since then.
Yeah, the AOL was the first kind of manifestation of it that I came across, and that was pushed mainly by by the business side versus the news side, and there was a lot of unhappiness with the quality of it. Again, one of these pioneers that I was talking about, who was friends with Kevin, a man named Richard Mislin, wrote a memo saying that, I think he said that it was something like it's a Rolodex and a Timex watch. In other words, he talked about how the product, this sort of AOL product, was not becoming to the New York Times, and that the newsroom needed to take it over. And eventually it did. So the screenshot you showed me is when the New York Times started doing it. But again, it began at AOL at Times. That was its first sort of manifestation. And they were trying to figure it out. And the New York Times is a conservative, small c, as in traditionalist organization. I think it moves slow. The one thing I learned in researching this book is that it's a mistake or an oversimplification to say that it is resistant to change. It do change. It just does it after much deliberation. Again, that has changed now. I think the paper moves quickly, with that old phrase, moves quickly and breaks things, and if it doesn't work, they just move to something else. But early on, and the AOL thing that you're referring to, was an example of that. That was something that they tried that didn't really work, but they moved pretty quickly.
And in the time frame of your book, they did move to color, obviously before they went online. But the whole idea, the old gray lady, putting color on the front page, and then later into other sections, and then you get Sri's going to show the paper. I mean, there's color. The photographs are just incredible.
And ads at the bottom.
Yeah.
Ads on the front.
That's a different thing. The ads on the bottom. I mean, not just color, but also just the fact that they're ads.
The color thing was a big. I would say quickly, the color thing was a big. In retrospect, it's not as big a deal as it seemed, but it gave a lot of people some agita, including the publisher at the time, Punch Sulzberger, because the paper was always known. I'm thinking as a New Yorker, as a sort of gray 8-column, kind of not ostentatious, and people really resisted color, and people also kind of, I think, were afraid of how it would look. They were very careful on how they approached it, and now I think it would look odd if you had a front page that didn't have color on it. It's a big part. It's a part of the transformation.
Sudha Parekh, Neil's mom, is watching and says, "Adam, nice history of evolution of the New York Times. I'm so glad you accepted and adjusted to the changes. Great work." And
thank you.
We since we're on the Parekh family, we should just say that Neil went to Wesleyan and you went to school about an hour south in Purchase College, and you won the distinguished alumni award. What did going to a state school, was that like to be in a place, as we know, the Times, a lot of people went to private schools and Ivy League and things like that. How did you worry about that at all? Did it affect you in any way?
I did. Yeah. I mean, the Times always had a reputation of, hiring Ivy League people, and Purchase College is a great college, but it certainly wasn't Ivy League. So that did give me some worry, but two things. One is it was at Purchase that I got into this world, because it was a new school at the time, and there was a new school newspaper that was called, I didn't name it, it was called The Load. And I started working for it, again, I think I mentioned before, as a freshman, and eventually became the editor of it. And it was just a great experience. I mean, this is like really reporting and breaking stories and literally pasting up and putting out the paper myself. And it gave me some great experience and understanding of journalism that I think trained me for this. I took a different course to coming into the New York Times, getting to the New York Times. I always knew I wanted to work there. I wrote a letter when I was probably a sophomore in college to a man named Adam Clymer, who was the national political reporter at the time. And I said, "Dear Mr. Clymer, you don't know me, but I want your job. Don't get worried. I'm willing to wait. Will you meet with me?" Right? So he's like, "Oh yeah, sure. I'd love to meet with you." So I get all nervous. I go into New York. I meet with him in the Times cafeteria. I got a haircut. I had hair too back in those days. And then, when he said, "I give you one piece of advice, which is get out of New York, go work in a paper like in North Carolina or something like that, and then come back and work for the Times." Right? Well, I didn't, for various reasons, I didn't do that, but I did work my way up to various newspapers, the Gannett Westchester newspapers, small newspaper, then the Daily News, and then the USA Today. And then when I finally got hired at the New York Times in 1996, I was somehow invited to some fancy Washington party before the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and Adam Clymer was there. And I went up to him, I said, "Adam, you probably don't remember me, but you've been so influential in my career, and I'm so grateful." And he's like, "I do remember you, and I'm glad to see you took my advice." I didn't have the heart to tell him that I did, but he was always a great mentor. He was a wonderful guy.
Aliyah Papageorgiou is watching from Brussels, and she says it's snowing there. So we have this international audience. Also, by the
Fantastic.
way, Craig Newmark from Craigslist is retweeted and is watching the show.
Oh, great.
As we know, he had a big influence in the evolution of newspapers and has been a big supporter of journalistic organizations and newsrooms, and also the CUNY Newmark School of Journalism is now named for him. Is one of those folks who understood the power of the internet very, very early. And thank you, Craig, for sharing. Neil's also thanking Ram Kumar, who is watching as well. Tell us where you're watching from, folks. How's your Sunday? We're going to get to the paper in just a minute. And Marilyn, who's watching from Staten Island, said, I visited the New York Times in fourth grade when they were typesetting the paper. And you know, Adam, that when the presses were in the old Times building, you'd know when the presses were running.
Yeah, because you could feel them kind of rumble to life. They were in the basement floors of the paper, and everything was done. The trucks were that you'd come out of work at night, and the trucks were there waiting to get the paper and take them out. This was before the plans were moved to Queens and other places. And that was a big, you sort of had a feeling of like being part of this big operation. And I probably made the same kind of visit. It's too long ago to remember. When I was in school, I took a look at the presses too. It was very cool. I think it's a bowling alley now.
One of the things we got to do, Adam, was go to the printing plant now, which is not in Manhattan, it's in Queens. And Mike Connors, who's production manager there, did a read along with me while the presses were running. So that was a lot.
Cool. That's a great idea.
I learned so much, and he's from a family of Times folks, so that was really interesting. James, watching on LinkedIn, has already given us a good review. It says it's a great session. Thank you all for watching. Tell us how your Sunday is. Tell us where you're watching from, and any questions to Adam about politics. We haven't gotten to the politics yet. This is going to be, Adam, in my estimation, we say every election is the most consequential election in a generation, is I think the standard phrasing. But next year, I look at it not just in the United States. I look at the elections in India, in Indonesia, the UK will be soon after. That it's going to be a year of consequential elections around the world, and the role of the media, social media, AI, it's going to make covering it that much more difficult. So how are you preparing to cover 2024?
I mean, what you say is true. I think that every time I've covered an election, and there's been a lot of them, I always talk about them as being the most important election in our lifetime. And, that's not always true. That's kind of a little bit of huff and puff to try to make the story more interesting than it was. I mean, I'm not sure that 2004 was the most important. God loves John Kerry and George W. Bush, but I'm not sure that was the most consequential election of our lifetime.
Just to be fair, in the sense that the path to Iraq had already happened, and so that nothing was going to.
Yes, absolutely.
There may have been a sooner exit, maybe, if it was a different president, but certainly the enormous damage and the legacy of the war was already set in motion. So
it was 2 years past. Yeah, it was done. Yeah.
And same thing maybe with 2012, maybe also what you're saying, when you look at Mitt Romney versus
right.
But now the differences in the parties seem like much more also. So you can talk about that too, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of people who are arguing convincingly that there's a lot at stake in this election because of, former President Trump gets the nomination and then gets reelected. He's been pretty clear about some of the things that he wants to do. And there are a lot of people who argue that democracy, as we know it, is at stake. And I mean, I just feel like it's a very, very important election. And you're right. There's all these other forces. AI who knows how we're going to deal with that. But I just think it makes it. The one thing I would say, as someone who's done a bunch of these elections, is you need to learn from the past. Like, obviously, I have a decent amount of experience going back to, I don't even want to say what year, but 1988. But you don't want to get trapped by it because things keep changing, right? Voter patterns change. The way voters get information changes. AI is a really good example. So that's what I do to keep moving forward, or try to move forward. Like, learn from the past, but don't get trapped by it. And I think if you talk to consultants who are running campaigns, the good ones will tell you the same thing. Learn from the past, but don't get trapped by it. Because we don't really know what AI is going to do in terms of how it's going to change campaigns, but it could be dramatic. It's just one of many things.
Yeah, and certainly we need to be paying attention. Let's see, our friend David K. Johnston is watching, former New York Times colleague of Adam's, and he says, Adam, your terrific book is full of facts and insights that many of us didn't know. That's saying something if there's something that David didn't know. But why did you let the Wall Street Journal's smearing of the New York Times staff go unchallenged? You reproduced WSJ page one headlines, but wrote nothing more, reinforcing the false impression that New York Times journalists didn't want to be held accountable. In fact, Busy staff spoke in support of creating a public editor. But Dan Okrent agreed with the complainer that, and he goes on. So can you talk about what this is? We can't even fit the comment in here, but if you can talk.
Yeah. Hey, David, thanks for your kind words. I'm actually not remembering this specific example of reproducing Wall Street Journal page one headlines in the book. But I do think, if I could talk about Dan Okrent for a second, which I don't mean to change the topic, but like Okrent was the first public editor, and I think did a really, really, really good job of sort of overseeing what the New York Times was doing and catching the paper at its mistakes and trying to put it in perspective. As you know, the position was eliminated a couple of years ago, and I'm not sure that was the greatest idea in the world.
So can you, one thing that I want to get to, Adam, and before we get to the paper, is that folks who are watching will know that there's a lot of criticism of the New York Times on a daily basis, from the right and from the left. So I want to hear what that's like to be constantly criticized by even your peers sometimes from other publications, also from folks who are scholars and others criticize. I went to the Wikipedia section of controversies about the New York Times. It starts with the coverage of the Russian Revolution. I thought it would start with the Holocaust, but it starts with the Russian Revolution and mistakes that the Times may have made then. So talk a little bit about that, and how do you approach those in the book? I know you don't pull any punches in some of those controversies.
Yeah, I mean, the paper's had a long history of coming under fire and making mistakes. You talk about the Holocaust. In mine, I focus on a couple of them because I think they're consequential. I think that the reporting on Iraq and WMD, weapons of mass destruction, is one of the things that I stress, one of the things that led the nation into war. That is really consequential, and I think it hurt the paper's reputation for a long, long time. I talk about Jason Blair, I see he's on the screen now, who was a serial fabulist, who made up all kinds of stories until he was caught. You still hear people when they want to criticize your coverage say, "Oh, you're just like Jason Blair." I mean, it just did a lot of damage to the paper. I think the paper's under more criticism now, or as much as ever, particularly because of Israel, from the left and from the right. But it's not new to say the paper has been under criticism. I mean, I remember covering the 2004 campaign. We were getting pounded all the time about how we were writing about polls and whether we were giving false equivalence between, John Kerry and Bush on Iraq and what they were saying about Iraq, and whether we were being strong enough in fact checking these guys. And that's a much different world than now. So it's always been an issue. I think the trick when you're a reporter, because Twitter has really changed it, you just get much more incoming than you would have gotten before, is you want to keep an open mind to the possibility, at least, that you've screwed up a story or messed up a fact, but you can just it's easy to become overwhelmed by it or become defensive, because some of the criticism is just having fun. It's just people trying to get attention. But it's just the way the world is now. I just speak as a reporter. I think I'm speaking for other people in the paper as well. You need to find that balance between paying attention to what's going on, but not letting it get inside your head.
Debbie Bernick saw your posting and wrote about this broadcast on that, so thank you. Paula Kiger, a longtime producer of this show. This award, Paula, is partly due to your great work, so thank you. Watching from Tallahassee, Florida. How important will Florida be in this election?
In my opinion, not very. Listen, let me give you one caveat here. I think that we have all learned in my business to be really careful about making predictions, even though political reporters are making predictions all the time. had a long history of never predicting a way the race would turn out, and I broke that rule in 2016, and I will not break that rule again because I was wrong. That said, I think Florida is trending more and more Republican. There was a time when it was a contested state, obviously. Think back to the 2000 election between Gore and George W. Bush, right, which is decided by 900 votes. But it's become more and more Republican for all kinds of reasons. And I think the best way for people watching this show to measure that is see when the general election comes, see how much time the candidates spend in that state and see how much money they spend on advertising in that state. And my guess is it will be de minimis. That's, people can say whatever they want, but the best way to judge what's really going on is just watch where the bodies are and where the money is. That's the lesson. And my guess is they won't be in Florida.
Sri, we lost your audio for a second, so
yeah, that was me.
if we can try that again.
Yeah, we said that Tim Russert said that was all Florida in the campaign, and that was certainly one of the things that we saw. So we're getting to the paper much later than normal, Adam.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, it's great.
It's a great paper this week. You read it.
Yeah, we want everybody to think about the news, and that's why we do this on our show. One of the things that we want to do is just ask you a little bit about the stopping at 2016. Has there been feedback about that? And do you explain to folks who may have joined late why you chose that as the stopping point?
Right. So I stopped the narrative in 2016 for a couple of reasons. The main one is I think that I didn't have that much to add at this point, analytically or research-wise, on what's happening post-2016. One thing I learned about this book, doing this book, is how I hope I was able to bring perspective, depth, understanding, better research about stuff that's going on in the past. And I think that, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's happened since 2016, which I think is obviously important. I'm not sure we know exactly what it means yet. It's just a little too soon. Like, for example, let's take the criticism of the papers, some of the papers' coverage of the Middle East conflict. I mean, it feels like that's really important. It feels like it says a lot about how the paper is adjusting to this faster clock of reporting of this more kind of advocacy world that we're in. But I think that I would not be able to offer the kind of perspective and understanding that I hopefully do in everything else in the book. I do think that there is a great book to be done at some point in this era that we're in now, 2016 to whatever, through 2024. I just think it's a little too soon. So that was my reason in doing that. And it's not like, somebody said, oh, well, the book has to end someplace. No, it was more considered than that. And the other reason, as I mentioned earlier in the show, is I did not want to be in a situation where I was writing about stuff that I was living, right? Like, I didn't want to go to work every day and be people looking at me and thinking, oh my God, am I going to show up in this book? No, that would not be, in my opinion, it would be untenable. So those are the reasons why.
All
but
right.
again, I want to be clear. I think that there is a lot of stuff has happened since 2016, and I think it will make for a great book one day.
And that's the book, How the Newspaper of Record Survived Scandal, Scorn, and the Transformation of Journalism. And we're talking to Adam Nagourney about the book and his work. And we're now going to review the paper with him. And Adam, how this works is I'll just I'll kind of flip through the stories. If something catches your eye, a photograph, a story, a name of a colleague you want to give a shout out to, just jump in at any point. So we're looking, the lead story is Control Tower Vacancies Compromising Air Safety. A fatigued and demoralized workforce is increasingly prone to risky errors. And this is what happens on a Sunday, right? The way the paper works is that this as the lead story may not be breaking news, but could be an investigation or some other way to capture and stand out in a very crowded news cycle.
I think that's long been the case for the Sunday paper, not always. I think now more than ever, most people are looking to their phones for breaking news. That is a terrific story. And there's a lot of talk these days about the paper like doing live briefings and this sort of fast moving stories. And also, I don't agree with this, but clickbait, the paper doing stuff to just get clicks. I don't really think the paper does that. Maybe just not a lot, but minimally if at all. But this is the kind of journalism that distinguishes the New York Times, right? Where they take, I think it's 2 reporters, and just say, go at this. I bet they were working on this for months, and it's an incredibly well researched, presented, written story. And this kind of story, to me, is what the New York Times has always been about. Whether I'll ever get on a plane again, that's another question. But it's a really important story, incredibly well done.
This is, by the way, the story is by Emily Steele and Sydney Ember. And if we think about America's infrastructure, we know it's broken in so many ways, Adam. And some of the things that are broken may not have the dangers associated with it as just this one industry. So we want this to be the focus of folks, and the authorities need to step in and fix this. Here's the lead picture in color, as we know, thanks to the transformation you've seen there. Far from Moscow, confounding loss. And this is about a woman and her daughter. She lost her son in a Russian village scarred by war. Israel launches intense strikes in South Gaza.
Can I back you up for 1 second?
Sure.
I can't see who took. I don't have the paper yet. It's too early here. I can't see who took the photo, but from the look of
Nana Heitman.
It looks like it's a beautiful portrait. Again, I'm looking at it on the same way everyone else does. And the point I want to make here is that the Times, and this happened under Howell Raines in 2000, really has transformed itself into a showcase for great photography, right? The paper didn't used to be like that. The paper used to be like, gray photos of old guys, but now you see great, again, from what I can see on the screen, great in-depth emotional pictures like that. Not exploitive, emotional pictures like that. And that's a big part of the way the paper changed even before it went to digital. And obviously photographs and the use of photography and video now is crucial to the way the paper presents the news. And anyway, I think that's a really good example of, even in the dead tree version of the paper, I hate to use that phrase, but I just did, you still see that done. Yeah, right. And we're just scrolling up now, you can see it again and again. These just amazing photographs. This is another example. I mean, I don't want to pull you off it. I saw there was a great story. I don't even know if it's in the paper yet. It might just be posted on Catalina Island in California, how they have to kill the deers to keep it alive. But we brought in the paper brought in one of its great photographers to shoot it. And there's beautiful pictures of it there too. And I'm a big photography person, so I love the fact that the paper's doing stuff like that. Long answer, sorry. Keep reading.
Yeah, no, I love the answer, and to me that looks like a Nat. The highest compliment I can give is say it looks like a Nat Geo photograph, like a National Geographic magazine photograph.
Yeah.
That's what they've done. Distrust, death threats, and a town's Hail Mary. Shared values helping neighbors bridge the political divide. Jonathan Weissman's story out of Colorado. So that looks like something
that's a great story.
Yeah.
Jonathan's a long time political reporter at the paper. He's really good. And that story just blew me away. I mean, another example, I haven't had a chance to talk to him. I'm going to ask him about it. How much time he spent on it. It looked like he spent tons of time there talking to people, reporting it. And it's what, in my opinion, makes the Times the Times. Taking this sort of episode in the community and using it to draw larger points about American society today and American society in the time of Trump. I would recommend it to all your viewers here. It's really, really well done and powerful, and just like an insight into where we are today.
James says that ATC story is vital and important. And I tell folks, who talk about, the value of a newspaper, that's what you're paying for. You're paying for the time that was given to Jonathan to go out and reporting like this, or to Emily and Sydney. Surge in oil, U.S. oil cuts prices, but raises climate concerns. And we're at the start, as you know, of the big UN climate conference in Dubai. Even in her final chapter, Sandra Day O'Connor balanced love and duty. And this is Kate Zernecki's piece. And
it's a beautiful story. I don't mean to keep gushing over front page story. I just thought it was a strong front page day. So Kate Zernecke, great reporter, book writer. That was a beautiful story about Sandra Day O'Connor, and I think some of it's been written, but a lot of it is not about her life after she left the court and her relationship with her husband, who had also had Alzheimer's disease, which is what she died from. Again, an example of where it looks like editor said, this looks like a really good story. Go get it. And if it takes, a month, who cares? We're going to get it. So,
well, one thing that I do want to just discuss, since we're just mentioned an obituary, Henry Kissinger.
right.
For critics of Kissinger, not even one word can be said positively or neutrally about him. And so we saw a Washington Post story about his relationship with starlets as a kind of style section story when he died. We've seen other things trying to look at his life overall. I'm sure you encounter this in your reporting, where trying to balance the story, trying to talk about people in a more nuanced way. Nuance doesn't work in today's social media and digital world.
You raise a good question. David Sanger wrote the obituary of Henry Kissinger, and I thought that he did an extraordinary job on it, frankly. And I have not talked to him because I'm wondering what kind of blowback, if any, he got. Kissinger was an incredibly contentious figure. I thought it was a really balanced obituary. They caught both sides of him, but people still hate him. Kissinger, as if it's 1971, right? It's just like those emotions, those old wars never went away. I think you raise a really good point here. I do try in this book, but also in stories I write about, to present more nuanced pictures of complicated and potentially polarizing figures, whether they're former executive editors of the New York Times, or whether they're, I was going to say Donald Trump, but he's just way out there. But whether it's, a governor like Mario Cuomo, who I wrote the obituary about, or Andrew Cuomo. So I didn't write his obituary, he's still alive. I sort of magazine profile about him. So I do try to write about difficult characters. I think it's better to present them with nuance and complexity. And I think that's what David did in his book in his obituary of Henry Kissinger.
Here's a way the Times has changed. Here to help, the best exercises to prevent neck pain. The kind of service journalism, which a lot of journalists at the New York Times and other places look down upon in decades past. Now you'll see this, and the Times, of course, is in the service journalism business. And here is a headline from history: Castro is setting up party in the communist pattern. And this is the kind of coverage that we saw the role that the New York Times and others played in the run-up to the war in Iraq, but also all wars, journalists play a role. Their coverage brings attention, and folks decide and officials decide what to do. Here's a quote of the day: "I had no role models, and then comes this woman, Sandra Day O'Connor, who says I can make decisions and I can think independently." This is Molly Whitten, 75 years old.
Can we talk one second about what you said about the service? Because I think you raised a really important point about what's going on now, and to some extent what I deal with in the book. This is what I was referring to before when I said that, the paper does stuff that's going to draw readers. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. I mean, we all want neck exercises or, new ways to cook chicken. I'm not being funny, in NYT cooking, or recommendations on where to buy a new router, for example, from Wirecutter. But that, I think it's a mistake to say that means that the New York Times has sort of diminished itself, because, again, going back to the front page that we just went over, it still has all this great stuff. It's not just one of the others. It's now this whole big package of stuff. So I kind of resist the sort of line now, and I wonder what I would say if I'm writing the next book in 10 years, which I won't. But if I was, it says the Times is now just going in for clicks with this sort of reader service stuff. I think the paper still at heart is what it has always been.
This reminds me of my friend Mitra Kalita, who runs Epicenter, which is a newsletter and media or company about the epicenter of the pandemic in Queens. And one of the things she did was help not just tell people where you can get vaccines, but help readers get vaccine appointments. Basically, the ultimate reader services, keeping them alive, was the point that she was making by doing that. That's not something the New York Times would do. They would give you a list of vaccine places. Here it was going that extra step. So it was interesting. Here is the international section. An unusual name can be a burden. In Japan, parents are being reined in. You would know this, Adam, but I was born in Tokyo. My father had no problem picking me out in the window. And I, in fact, have a Japanese nickname, Kiku, which is the word for chrysanthemum, a flower my mom liked. Unfortunately, Kiku is a girl's name. Kikuo is a boy's name. And any Japanese person who hears that Kiku, they have a laugh. It's like being a boy named Sue, as the song goes. Let's keep going here. Candidate's victory in Ottawa raises question: did Beijing help him? China's growing sway focus of inquiry. And my dad wrote, who's a former Indian ambassador, wrote an article about Kissinger, talking about the importance of China and how China, I mean, that might be Kissinger's ultimate legacy, is what he did in opening up China and the relationship with China, as we know. And it'll play a big role in the coverage you have next year, Adam, as you're covering the U.S. Elections.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. This is that story we talked about earlier on the front page. And let's see. India's morgues full of evidence, and ethnic conflict is not over. This is about what's happening in Manipur. There's so much coverage of Israel, and very contentious discussion of coverage of Israel of the Israel-Hamas war, of course. A plan to save Catalina. This is the story you're talking about.
It is in there. Okay.
Gun down deer from the sky. This sounds like something Sarah Palin was doing to wolves in Alaska.
Read that story online, because you can see the beautiful photography that's with it. Not all the photos are there, but they're in color online. They're just beautiful. It's a beautiful place, but he really captured it.
Is it a matter of budget? I mean, you may not even know this. Is it a matter of budget when they decide where to put color, or how does that work exactly?
I'm going to answer you without knowing the answer, which never stops me. I think it is a matter of budget. I think you don't want to put color pictures on every page. I don't know why they did it in that case, so I'm just kind of guessing. But they might have.
Don't let it stop you.
It never has. They might have just thought that it had such a beautiful display online and prominent display online. There you go.
Whoa! Look at that.
You see? He's a great photographer.
Folks, Dr. Tachi is watching. Good afternoon, all. Watching from Florida. Dr. Tachi has a great show on Instagram, so find her and follow her, please. Here is DeSantis takes fight for second place to Haley's home state. And let's see, control towers and the controversy over that. Lots of stories here. Court upholds Smollett's conviction. Some of you will remember Jesse Smollett and the hoax he perpetrated. We are in the world of obituaries. And last week we had our friend Amy Padnani on the show talking about her book Overlooked, about people of color and women who had been ignored and overlooked by the New York Times obituaries. And here's that's the episode. You can find that if you just go to digimentors.group. You can find on the NYT Read Along tab, you will find it, a celebration of remarkable, underappreciated people who broke the rules and changed the world. That was just last week, the last episode we did. Thank you, Amy, for that. And I know Amy's watching today. Pablo Guzman, 73, Puerto Rican activist turned TV newsman, dies. And here, was always amazing to me that someone could go being a founder of the Young Lords to a journalist, an Emmy award-winning journalist in New York City, and a presence on the street. So many folks knew him well.
I'd forgotten that until I read it. Obviously I grew up with him, and I'd forgotten that he had been a Young Lord. Until I saw that picture this morning, I had forgotten that he had been a member of the Young Lords. I forgot that whole history of him. It's really
not just a member, a founder.
The founder, yeah.
Witty. Imagine this in your obituary: John Gotti's favorite reporter.
Yeah, well, whatever it takes.
Ronald Fischetti, 87, fearless lawyer who represented Trump in 2 inquiries. And so this must have been the earlier avatars of Donald Trump and not the recent stuff since he's 87. So I haven't seen which, as we know, Trump had trouble going back many, many decades. Abraham Bergman, 91, pediatrician who sought answers to SIDS, dies. This is Southern Infant Death Syndrome. He was unusually successful as a private citizen who influenced legislation. So, and you told me you're not a big sports guy.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm not. I missed that. In fact, I went back and looked at the book when I was done and realized this wasn't by intent, but there's like barely any mention of sports in there at all, which is overlooked. All due respect, Amy, I don't mean to steal the title of your great book. That was overlooked. I do think that if I came back and do another book, I would talk about the elimination of the sports department. So,
yeah, and we did a great show on a very sad topic about the elimination of that department. By the way, look who we had. We had Laurie Mifflin, Claire Smith, George Vesey, and Bill Roden.
Wow.
And George is watching, and we have a comment from him that we're going to show you when we go to the real estate section. And Amy is watching as well. And Amy said that congrats on your book. What a heave.
Thanks, Amy. He's a good thing, right?
Yeah, that's right. You have to double check these things. Okay, we have about 20 minutes left with Adam Nagourney. We have about 3 hours worth of newspaper still to go. So we want to make sure you get your questions into Adam. Naomi says, Overlooked is that rare coffee table book you'll want to read. Adam's book is fascinating and entertaining. Great show, says Naomi. And so let's keep it in the Service family. We have a question here from Lou Service, who asks, congrats on writing such a gripping book, Adam. There's so much fascinating backstory, even for people like me who lived through those years at the New York Times. What did you find out that surprised you the most?
This is a little bit like being asked who my favorite child is. So, Lou, there's a lot of stuff, but I think I'll give you one example that really kind of knocked my socks off, as they say. I was just going through papers that somebody handed me boxes of papers up on the 11th floor of the New York Times building, I think. And it included correspondence to Arthur Sulzberger Jr. I was happy to be going through it. And most of it was like thank you letters. And I love this copy of this newspaper. And there was an invitation from Donald Trump there inviting him to some event that Arthur said no to. But one thing I found was this correspondence between Bob Herbert and Sulzberger. Herbert was a columnist and the newspaper's first Black columnist. And I realized from reading this extremely heated correspondence that Arthur had run into Bob Herbert in the elevator and informed him that he was taking his column away. Now that's the publisher's right. That's one of the things he does. But Bob was really upset about it. Arthur in his correspondence says that you were not doing what I was looking for you to do, which I think was more New York stuff. I think he used the word urban stuff, but not loaded in the way that phrase has become now. And it kind of ends with Bob saying, if you feel I need to do this, I'm going to have to take action, suggesting I think legal action. And then Bob stayed on for another 5 years. It never happened. So you can guess what happened. But it was just like interesting to come across this. I had never, ever heard about that. That was really kind of shocking. And again, it's what I said before. It's what happens when you're going through archives. You find out all kinds of cool stuff that you didn't know happened or existed.
Sure. Ron Thomas, former guest on the show, usually in Dubai, is watching from Verona, New Jersey. I'm going to be in Dubai in a couple of weeks, so look forward to seeing him there. We had some comments here from someone whose family worked at the time, so I'm just going to pull that up. MD writes on YouTube, so we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. The NYPL Rosenthal archives are fascinating. My grandfather was a New York Times stringer for 4 decades in Ireland, and reading his file was an eye-opening look into what his boss's thoughts were editorially. And MD also says, in another way, it was like reading your grandpa's HR file, discussion about giving him some sort of stipend upon retirement and seeing their perceptions of him as a reporter in his late 60s and 70s. And the Times has rules about management retirement ages and things like that might surprise some folks.
Yeah, I discovered this too. Like everyone assumed, excuse me, I'm sorry, that there was a mandatory 65 and you're out rule. It's not a rule. It's more of a policy. The paper didn't always do it. They did it with Abe Rosenthal back in 1980, 85, I think, or 86. I think in part to get rid of him, and pretty much they've stuck with it ever since. But I keep telling people here, like, see if you can find any existence of the 65 and you're out policy in any kind of written form. It doesn't really exist, as best as I can tell. That said, it's probably a good idea to circulate people out. You want to get fresh blood in there, particularly at the top of the paper. The thing about Rosenthal's papers, for that question, I came across two sets of papers in the New York Public Library. One was his official New York Times papers, but he also kept a private archive of his own personal papers that he also donated to the public library. And in terms of Lou's question before about what surprised me, I came across a journal entry. He was thinking about writing a memoir, which he never did, but he was talking there about gay reporters in the newsroom. And the paper had a long history of I would argue, discriminating against gay people. And people used to blame Rosenthal. I mean, I think that was true. But reading this, it is true, because he talks about gay people and he says, I would appoint a gay person to cover, the arts or books, or, you get the drift here, but not to cover the State Department or the White House. He said gay people form cabals, and they're either cabals or cliques in the newsroom, and they're very disruptive. And I just read that and I went, oh yeah, well, that kind of answers the question about how, Abe Rosenthal felt about gay people. And it translates in terms of coverage. The paper was very slow in terms of covering the AIDS epidemic as it broke out in the early 80s under the editorship of Abe Rosenthal. So there's real life implications of that.
I want to, sorry, jumping in. I want to ask a question just in terms of, in that context, Adam.
Yeah.
You talked about it being slow to cover AIDS. Can you remind me where Abe Rosenthal's leadership of the Times fell in with the evolution of the wedding vows pages and covering gay marriages on those pages? Did that come much later?
That comes later, and the paper wouldn't even use the word gay under Rosenthal. So yeah, that comes much later. Max Frankel comes in and really changes things around. One of which is beginning to use the word gay, and vows comes much later. I don't think that Abe Rosenthal. I'm sure he would never ever have permitted that. He fought the use, slightly different, but also a social issue. He fought the use of the word Ms., as did the publisher Punch Sulzberger, for years. I write about this in the book. Until a certain point, he finally changes his mind and says, "Let's do it." It comes to the end of his editorship, and I think that he's beginning to think about his legacy, and he realizes that he doesn't want to go down in the history books as the editor who resisted this obviously vast change in the way women were being addressed in public life.
Do you think the Times will ever drop the Mr. and those kind of honorifics in there?
If you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have said no, because it's so much of what makes the Times the Times. But I could sure see it happening. I mean, I kind of like it. I like writing it and reading it, but it does feel a little bit, not stuffy, because I'm not sure stuffy is a bad thing, actually, but it does feel maybe a little bit out of date. When I was working in culture for, I guess, a year and a half and 2 years, culture does not use honorifics. And that was a pretty easy adjustment for me to make. I'm back in politics where we do use honorifics, and that's a pretty easy adjustment for me to make. So the answer to your question is, I could see that happening. Yeah, there'll be a big furor, and then it'll be over.
I don't think the magazine. Maybe I can't remember now, but I don't.
I think you're right. No honorifics. If this is just memory, I think I'm right. You're right. We're both right. No honorifics in the magazine or sports.
I'm going to follow up on that as well. Sorry, Sri. As our culture is evolving, and there's more recognition and more inclusion of people who are non-binary. I mean, I'm sure the Times has written about people who personally do not use those honorifics. Do they? I mean, how does that work? I'm assuming
they do. They absolutely honor that, and they will refer to someone who say something like this, wants to be referred to as they, right? It says it's not. I forget. There's a phrase that they use. It's like does not identify as either a man or a woman and wants to be addressed as they. So they are respectful of that.
But you can kind of see that evolving over time to
just
going to first name, last name without any explanation or reference to they prefer to not be identified or whatever. It's just their name is Neil Parekh, and let people deal with that.
I mean, you could do that in your writing. My guess is people do that. You find that going back to the Miz example, reporters really like resented the fact that you had to end every interview with a woman by asking, "Do you prefer to be addressed as Miss or Mrs.?" And I think that was one of the things that led reporters really pushing forward the use of the word Ms.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Miriam says, I love Bob Herbert's columns. He has a show on CUNY TV, I believe. Liz Pressman says, the stories about Abe Rosenthal and Jeff Schmaltz are horrific enough, but would be fascinating to read Abe's journals to see his inner thoughts at the time.
Jeff Schmaltz was a friend of mine. I knew him really well. He's a great mentor. He died of AIDS. As I recall, I think I read all Rosenthal's journals, at least the ones that he put into the New York Public Library. I don't recall seeing any mention of Jeff in there. Running the dates in my head, I don't think people knew that Jeff was not out for being gay until, I don't know, 1989, 1999, when he was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. And by that point, Abe Rosenthal was up writing a column or maybe even going out of the paper. So, but he certainly knew Jeff. I don't know what his thoughts were about him or if he had any idea.
We're just going to quickly glance through the rest of the paper since we only have 10
Sorry.
minutes. Oh, it's okay. Sunday Night Lights is about the most spectacular TV show in America, which is all the the Sunday night football games. And then I just wanted to show everybody this unusual treatment here. There's a chicken, and it's a game of chicken. The Biden administration thinks that poultry producers and many other American companies are abusing their market power, but the antitrust revival has struggled to take flight. So lots of puns and lots going on, and there's a lot of effort in these 2 pages, Adam.
It's interesting. I didn't see that yet, but the paper, historically has had an aversion or a high bar for using puns. It sounds to me like that met the bar, but that is striking to me.
Here is, can you take punk rock and put it in a museum? Fat Mike thinks so. Institutionalized is the headline here, and I will read this at another time. Let's keep going. Here is, let us tell you a story. What would American theater be without its Jewish actors, playwrights, and directors? And there are 3 different covers that they've made, depending on which version you get. I don't think I have time to find it here. Neil might find it later and we can put it on the screen or tweet it out. So there were 3 different covers of this. And then Neil was excited about Bake It Bright, 7 kaleidoscopic cookies for the season. So this is really unusual treatment here, as you can see. And 7 ways to celebrate and how to make these gingerbread cookies, matcha cookies, Mexican hot chocolate cookies, Neapolitan checkerboard shortbread, rainbow rave cookies, and lemon butter curls. I'm super hungry now. Are you a cook?
I am. I'm not a baker. My better half's a baker. I cook, and I actually really I don't do anything off paper anymore. I use the NYT cooking app all the time for pretty much everything that I cook. Just great.
Here's something unusual. The ad for Disney on Broadway is cookies of the productions. So obviously some discussion between the cooking section and their advertiser in that case. Diva for the Ages is the arts and leisure cover. Metropolitan.
That's a fantastic story, by the way. Can I say one thing really quickly? As a Maria Callas fan, that's a story you want to read online because they embedded clips of her various areas to sort of make the point of the piece. I think that's a story that would be delightful to anyone, whether or not they liked opera or had any idea about Maria Callas. It really explains why she's so extraordinary. Okay, I'll stop.
Excellent. In Queens, Little Caracas is taking root. Venezuelan flags, foods and accents are coming up. And we have a gift link and a PDF, Neil is reminding me, of the New York Times cooking special on cookies on the website. So just go to nytimes.com, go to digimentors.group and click on the NYT Read Along and go to Adam's story, Adam's Read Along, and there you'll find a link. This we were able to do with our good friends at the Times, and especially the design section, Wayne Camadoy. So thank you very much, and do check that out. So you get a gift link and a PDF of the NYT cooking. So wherever you are in the world, you can make those cookies today. And real estate, I know George Vesey had a comment about the real estate section. He said, a real estate, great feature on a gardening program for people with developmental problems by Margaret Roach, gardening expert whose dad, James Roach, was a longtime sports editor. So this is really some good backstory here about this. So let me see if I can find that gardening story. I wonder if it's online and not yet in the paper. Neil, I don't know if you saw it in the paper, but let's see here. I don't know if it made it. Oh, here it is. A company cultivates seeds and people. And Margaret Roach is the writer, and as we heard, daughter of a longtime sports editor at the Times. Here is the Sunday Opinion. Who you are is a choice. And Henry Kissinger's foreign policy was bad for domestic politics too, is one of the editorials there. Sunday Styles cover is Noah Kahan, who's Vermont's sensitive woodsman, pop pulled out of pain. And the Sunday Business cover, the upstart website Kick is a wild west of live streaming. Gen Z loves it. And so do the well-paid streamers. But does it exist mostly to get users to gamble? So interesting front page. But that's also one of the evolutions of the business section, Adam, that they using very strong graphics and photography for this lead story, almost like a magazine piece sometimes.
That's right. Absolutely true.
And the book review, what would you like to say about the book review? And we have a card with what they said about your book, but you can talk over that and tell us about the book review. This was reviewed as they do when a Times book is being reviewed. It's almost always by a non-Times person.
Yeah, always, I think,
Alan Rusbridger, editor-in-chief of The Guardian from 95 to 2015. So a big part of the period you cover. It is not necessarily a book for those who have a favorite restaurant, but would rather not know what goes on in the kitchen. Nagourney described his journalistic colleagues by their nature self-reliant, secretive, insecure, competitive, sensitive, and suspicious. They have sprawling egos and a high self-regard. This isn't even half of it. Numerous passages are devoted to rivalries, feuds, conspiracies, squabbling, bullying, and jostling for position. That is what the paper, the review of Alan in the paper, in the book review. So you're welcome to talk about the book review or your own review.
Yeah, I mean, I think the book review is one of the, I think, last remaining really influential newspaper book reviews in the country. The LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, but it's still, it's a big deal. People want to get reviewed, excuse me, in the New York Times book review. I was honored to be reviewed there. It's a big deal. I certainly read it every Sunday.
Yeah, and here, one of the things that you have to do, as you know, as an author, is even as a New York Times author, is go out there and get the book out there. So you've been book touring. Here you are, getting up early to do the show. There was a time when it didn't require as much effort on the part of the authors, wouldn't you say? And now it's a different time, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a much more crowded market. It's harder to break through. Now I'm out of my expertise area completely. I think that the market for nonfiction books is not as defined as it once was. So I do lots and lots of stuff, lots and lots of online stuff. I wrote a book, I think 20 years ago, where I did more in-person bookstore stuff. They sent me and my co-writer around to various cities. Much less of that this time, much more emphasis on shows like this, on podcasts, on television. That's what they think sort of moves books. I don't know. I just say yes to everything because conversations like this, to me, I like talking about my book. So I really have. This has been great. I love doing stuff like this. So whatever it takes.
I see in the list of 100 notable books for 2023, Abraham Verghese' The Covenant of Water is here, and he told me when one of his before he wrote his first novel, he said that he was tired of these book tours where you'd be in, say, in Iowa, and there'd be in a bookstore with 10 people and 8 of them would be in the rain, coming in from the rain, and that he prefers the online marketing and being able to do that. Of course, he's been enormously successful since then.
10 people if you're lucky. I remember walking into a bookstore, my last store, they were like, it was raining, but there were like 2 people there. It was like, oh, shoot.
So even the rain did its part, but people didn't come in. So we could keep going here, talking to Adam Nagourney about his book, about his career. There's so much to learn and read and understand. There are also some great photographs in there, including of the folks we've been talking about in there over the years. So what we're going to do is, as we wrap up here, Adam, I'm just going to give you a moment to catch your breath. Adam and Neil and I are going to just chat for a minute, do some housekeeping. We're going to come back to you, and I'm going to ask you why people should buy this book. This entire 90 minutes has been a great promotion for the book, but I want to hear the please come out. So we're going to come back to you in just a moment and ask Neil to come say hi.
Absolutely, Sri. Thank you so much. And it's so great to see the book right there, front and center, with Adam. And of course, we have our copies of the book with us as well. I remember when we first reached out to Adam, he said yes right away. There was no hesitation about being on the show. And for folks to understand, anyone who's watching us, who's joining us for the first time, we do this every Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. This weekend was special, but we love the New York Times. We love print. We love journalism. And to get the chance to talk with Adam about his book about the Times, I think was just incredibly special. So many great insights, so many backstories. And I want to say that having Adam's insights and commentary on the articles was just as good. I think one of the more engaged, more involved guests that we've had in a long time, talking about a broad range of articles. The photographs that he was talking about with the Russia story, for example, pointing out the Maria Callas piece with the opera pieces, the video, and we put all those links in Facebook and LinkedIn so that you can find them. But what a great show!
Remind everyone that they should go to digimentors.group. There's a NYTreadalong tab, and you click in there. You'll get the PDF for the cookies section, as well as the PDF itself. So you get a gift link and a PDF. So you definitely want to check that out. And MD says, Adam, I'm loving the book, highlighting like mad. As a J schooler in September 2001, I remember such awe at the New York Times coverage on September 12th and the days and weeks after. It was so inspiring to read.
And that's one of the pictures in the book, is the front page of the New York Times after 9/11. And if we're both looking through our books now to see if we can find that picture.
But they also have the shuttle explosion and pictures from the newsroom and lots of great stuff in here. And there's the attack on the country.
Just incredible.
And we only read Gay Talese blurb here, but there were so many others. So tell us, Neil, what's coming up, and and then we'll wrap up and bring Adam back on.
And I'll just pull in James Brock's 5:30 LA time. Glad to see the recorded session. So that's an important point, right? If it is early for some folks, we do have some folks that watch 5:30. Ironically enough, Sri, our regular California viewers, Diana and Doug, weren't able to make the later show this week, but I'm sure they'll watch on replay. But yes, you can always watch our archives on the same links that we promote. And also, if you want to join our mailing list, please send me an email and we can add you to our mailing list. My email is neil@digimentors.group. I'm going to put that on the screen right now. And that way you can get updates on special shows like this one.
And if you're wondering what this is, if you're just joined us, this is an award that the Read Along got from the W3 Awards, a silver winner for Best Podcast. And we're not quite a podcast, but we'll take it. We're an internet show, but we're just so thrilled to be recognized for 8 years of doing this show. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Here's the email address. Also, if you'd like to sponsor us or anything else, if you'd like to be a guest, we do about 45 to 50 episodes a year. So please let us know if you know someone who should be a guest anywhere in the world. They can join us. And Dr. Tachi says, congrats, Neil, over to you for what's coming up.
Absolutely. So next week we have December 10th. We're actually going to do a deep dive into the paper. We haven't done this in a while. I'll be hosting, and we're going to actually spend more time with the New York Times than we usually do, really digging into a lot of the content. December 17th, Walter Grayson will be our guest. He's a former guest on the show. He actually came out with a new graphic novel, the history of hip hop. So that'll be fascinating to see. And it's an educational tool for educators around the country.
We
And
already
then
did we did a show on the coverage of New York Times of the
the New
50th
York Times
anniversary,
special.
which was great as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. We'll take 2 weeks off for the holidays, the last 2 weeks of December, but then we'll come back in January. Doug Levy will be our guest January 7th. He has a second edition of his book, The Communications Golden Hour. And then we have a number of guests in January, February. We're actually booking into March right now. So look forward to seeing those shows. And like I said, if you join our mailing list, you'll get the full lineup so you can plan out your Sundays.
And I want to just say that I'm not here next week because I'm heading to Stockholm to be part of the Nobel Week celebrations and the banquet and everything else. I've been blessed to be on the board of the Nobel Prizes efforts on the digital and physical events that they do apart from the main ceremony. And after that, Neil, as you know, I'm going off to Dubai and India to do my workshops on my non-scary guide to AI. So if anyone is interested in doing a version of that talk for your workshop, for your company, school, friends, enemies, I'd love to talk to you about that. Just message me, sri@digimentors.group, and I'd love to talk to you about how we can do that by Zoom or in person. We've already done it, Neil, in 8 countries since May of 2023.
You can also go to our website, digimentors.group/SriAI. digimentors.group/SriAI. You can see a little bit more background on the workshops, and also let us know if you're interested in organizing something, and we will be in touch.
All right, I think we're ready to bring Adam back. Our Adam has been a fantastic guest, of course, and we're very grateful to you, Adam. And what we're going to do is put you on, well, first there's the book, put you on full screen so that you can promote the book. Tell us why everybody listening, watching should put this on their list and maybe get it as a gift and who would be interested in this book?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. That was great. Listen, I think the New York Times is a crucial institution in American politics, in American media, and in American life. And I try to present it that way. This is not intended to be a book just for journalists or New York Times writers. This is a book about, I think, a really important part about this country and arguably this world. And I think, or I hope that I present the story in a way that's dispassionate but fascinating. And the combination of having access to so many players and to so many papers, I tried to write it in a way that it was dramatic and fast moving and revealing and satisfying. And, as I said before, I didn't know how the book would end. And I think the book does have a happy ending, not in any way minimizing the problems that the paper faces going forward, adjusting to this ever-changing journalistic and business world. But I think this is a really fascinating tale of a bunch of brilliant, flawed people who, for the most part, are trying to fulfill the mission of this newspaper, which is to put out the best kind of newspaper possible. So I think it's, I would suggest it for anyone who's interested in, again, politics, American life, media, just the way we are today. That's my pitch for it.
Great. Well done. I'm sorry that it's come to this, that you have to be doing so much promotion. Authors didn't have to do it, and the Gates Elise would probably have had to do just a few readings back in the day. For those of you who missed it, go back to the beginning of the show, which will run immediately on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and digimentors.group. One of the things that Adam talked about was the influence that Gates Elise's landmark book, The Kingdom and the Power, about the New York Times had on him, and how Gay Talese welcomed him into the paper at his home and wrote this amazing blurb and all of that for Adam. So that was great. Apollo says, great show. Have an awesome, kind week ahead. And Dr. Tachi is looking forward to seeing Walter Greason, Professor Greason's chat with Neil on December 17th on Sunday morning. So please join us for that. Adam, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
We're often accused of doing Kremlinology on the New York Times because it's so deep in the weeds, but you made it so interesting and so accessible to everybody, just like your book. So I appreciate that very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Terrific to hear that. Great being here.
Thank you, Adam.
Everybody.
Great having you. We'll see everyone next week.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Take care.